This is Quietive, a channel devoted entirely to helping you fall asleep through the gentle art of ASMR bedtime stories. This is a story of why the sound of rain has always made us feel a little safer and a little sleepier than almost any other sound on earth. We are going to look at the science behind it, the history behind it, and that very British habit of measuring, dressing for, and writing about weather that rarely leaves us alone for long. Some of what follows may surprise you. Some of it, I suspect, you already know about it. Part 1. The science of rain and sleep. Sound engineers talk about colours of noise. White noise contains every frequency at equal strength and can feel harsh, almost flat. Pink noise is gentler, with higher frequencies softening as they rise. And brown noise goes further still, deeper rumbling, closer to a waterfall than a shower. Rain sits close to pink noise, heavier rain closer to brown, and either way, it's something soft and steady, unpredictable in its detail, but constant in its shape. Sleep researchers think that matters. A sound like rain can quietly cover the sharp noises that might otherwise wake you without ever demanding your attention. At Northwestern University, a team led by the neurologist Phyllis C., director of Northwestern Centre for Circadian and Sleep Medicine, found that carefully timed pink noise played to older adults while they slept noticeably improved both the depth of their slow-wave sleep and their memory the next morning. Slow-wave sleep is the deepest stage of non-REM sleep, the phase when the brain consolidates memory and the body does much of its repair work, and it's deeply connected to the circadian rhythm that governs our whole sleeping and waking cycle. It isn't a perfect, tidy picture. Other researchers have found that noise played continuously through the night may not quite help as much as short-timed bursts. What holds up, though, is the underlying idea. A soft, steady sound genuinely seems to help a sleeping brain settle. 38% of 1,000 American surveys reported relying on background noise to fall asleep, and when British adults were asked the same question, rainfall came out on top, ahead of both music and the hum of a fan. Some of this crosses into ASMR territory that tingling calm some sounds bring on. You're in the majority if you've never felt it yourself, since only around 1 in 5 people report the tingle at all. One study found ASMR lowered people's heart rates while at the same time slightly raising the skin's electrical conductance, a sign the body is also more alert. Rain hasn't been studied as a trigger nearly as much as whispering has. What evidence does support it is that plenty of people find it soothing, and there's a decent science now pointing towards why. Part 2. Britain's long history of measuring rain. Given how much of it falls here, it's hardly surprising. Britain has such a long history of measuring its own rain, going back centuries. Richard Townley, that's Townley, of Townley Hall in Lancashire, kept rainfall records from 1677 to 1694. He's believed to be the first person in Britain to have done so. Nearly 2 centuries later, in 1860, George Simons began his own network with under 200 stations. And by the century's end, he had grown into something far bigger. Over over 3,000 stations making up his British rainfall organisation, staffed almost entirely by volunteers. The Met Office began life in 1854 under Robert Fitzroy, once captain of HMS Beagle on Darwin's voyage and the man who coined the word forecast. Around 800 lives were lost in the Royal Charter Storm of 1859, and the disaster pushed Fitzroy towards building a proper storm warning service, which led to the first public forecast published in the Times in 1861. Simon's volunteer network eventually merged into the Met Office in 1919. Britain's reputation for rain is well earned in places and rather unfair in others. The wettest inhabited spot is generally agreed to be Seathwaite in the Lake District, taking something in the region of 3.5 metres of rain a year, and during a single hour in September 1966, over 100 millimetres fell there in one downpour. Just half a metre falls each year at the other end of the scale, at Shoeburyness on the Thames estuary, Britain's driest recorded spot. Manchester, so famous for its rain that the reputation has become a bit of a joke. It isn't even close to being the wettest place in Britain. The wet Atlantic air meeting the ground in the west, cooling and then falling as rain, which is why Cumbria and the Highlands see so much of it, while the flatter east stays comparatively dry. Part 3. Rain in literature, art and folklore. The English have been writing about rain for a very long time, and rarely with much complaint. One of the oldest surviving examples is an anonymous verse from the early 1500s, known simply as Western Wind, not Western Wind. When wilt thou blow the small rain down can rain? It runs. Those are just 4 lines that have survived 500 years, partly because Tudor composers borrowed its tune for church music, and partly, I think, because longing for rain and longing for somebody has always been sat naturally together. Shakespeare gave rain the closing word in the 12th night, with Bestie singing that the rain, it raineth every day, and Robert Louis Stevenson later wrote a well-loved children's poem simply called Rain, noting how it falls on fields and tree, on umbrellas and on ships at sea. Painters felt the pull of it too. Turner exhibited a painting called Rain, Steam and Speed in 1844, a steam train crossing a bridge through a haze of weather, and it hangs today in the National Gallery. Long before rain gauges existed, people had their own ways of predicting it. There's a belief attached to the 15th of July, St. Swithin's Day, that whatever the weather does on that day continues for 40 days afterwards. St. Swithin's Day is the kind of folklore the Met Office is quite clear has no science behind it, though the rhyme has survived regardless. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. 3/4 of British adults, one Met Office survey found, still use some kind of weather folklore, even now. Part 4. Dressing for the rain. If the British have a genius for anything weather-related, it's inventing ways to stay dry, however reluctantly the world came round to accepting them. For centuries in London, only women carried umbrellas, and the man doing so was thought faintly ridiculous. Jonas Hanway changed that almost single-handedly, carrying one publicly from the early 1750s onwards, and he enjoyed plenty of mockery for it. Reportedly harassed by hackney carriage drivers who were worried a city full of dry pedestrians would put them out of business. Jonas Hanway, the pioneering umbrella carrier, and his name attached to the things for years. Umbrellas were nicknamed Hanways in his honour. Eventually, everybody wanted one. Charles Macintosh, a Scottish chemist, patented a waterproof fabric in 1823, sandwiching dissolved rubber between two layers of cloth, and started his raincoat company the following year. The early coats smelled unpleasant and melted in the heat, and it wasn't until vulcanised rubber came along that the Macintosh became the coat we'd recognise today. The Wellington boot came next, named for the Duke of Wellington. In 1817 he asked his shoemaker to modify the traditional riding boot, cutting it lower, using softer leather and waxing it for water resistance. Demand for the rubber version surged during the First World War when soldiers needed something to survive the flooded trenches, and it became one of the most recognisably British pieces of clothing there is. Part 5. The rain itself. Rain itself is worth a closer look. It begins with water evaporating from the sea, from lakes, from the leaves of plants, rising as vapour into cooler air and condensing around tiny specks of dust or solved to form clouds. 1,000,000 tiny droplets or so, colliding and merging again and again, is roughly what it takes to build something heavy enough to finally fall as a single drop. That particular scent has a name. It rises from dry earth and after the first rain in a while, and it's known as Petrichor. Petrichor, coined in 1964 by two Australian scientists, drawing on the Greek words for stone and for the blood of the gods. It comes partly from oils released by rock and soil, and partly from a compound called geosmin, produced by Streptomyces bacteria in the ground, which our noses are unusually good at detecting. Even the sound of rain has been studied closely. When a raindrop lands on water, much of what we hear actually comes from a tiny bubble of air trapped beneath the surface. It starts ringing like a very small bell. Smaller drops make surprisingly loud, high sounds this way, and larger ones make deeper, quieter ones, which is part of why rain sounds so different depending on what it's falling on: glass, water, leaves, or a tin roof. None of this, in the end, is really about the weather. It's about the fact that people have been trying to explain it, measure it, dress for it, and simply sit and listen to it for hundreds of years, long before anyone thought to ask whether it might help us sleep. The art critic John Ruskin put it rather well. Sunshine